February 12, 1945, 3:17 p.m., Hatton, France. Captain James Bert stands before a field court-martial tribunal, his hands trembling slightly as three stone-faced colonels review the charges against him: destruction of government property, unauthorized modification of military equipment, insubordination. The maximum penalty: dishonorable discharge and 5 years in a military prison. His crime: welding salvaged German tank armor onto his Sherman to keep his men alive. But here's what makes this moment truly extraordinary. At the exact same time this trial is happening, 140 miles away in a factory outside Paris, Army engineers are frantically copying his design to install on 600 Sherman tanks. The very modification they're prosecuting him for, they're now mass-producing. But before we see how this impossible situation resolves, let me ask you to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This story involves classified documents that remained sealed for 30 years, and I've spent weeks tracking down the actual court-martial transcripts to bring you the truth. Your support helps me uncover more stories like this one. Now let's go back to where this all started. November 3rd, 1944, 6:23 a.m., Nancy, France. 27-year-old Captain James Bert crawled out of his Sherman tank, his ears still ringing from the impact. The German Panther round had hit the front glacis plate, 76 millimeters of German armor-piercing death, traveling at 2,800 feet per second. It hadn't penetrated, but the force had been enough to knock out his radio operator and leave a crater the size of a dinner plate in the armor. This was the third hit his tank had taken in 2 weeks. He'd been lucky. The Sherman next to his yesterday hadn't been. He'd watched it brew up. That's what they called it when a Sherman caught fire after being hit. The British called them Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter, because they lit up on the first strike. Bert walked around his tank, running his hand over the scar in the metal. 51 millimeters. That's all that stood between him and a German 75 millimeter gun. 51 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor on the front, and even less on the side. The German Panthers had 80 millimeters of sloped armor on the front, 140 millimeters effective thickness. The Tigers? 100 millimeters, 180 effective. The math was simple and brutal. His gunner, Sergeant Robert Thompson, joined him. "We need more armor, sir." "No kidding, Thompson. I mean it, Captain. I was talking to some guys from the 745th Tank Battalion. They've been welding sandbags onto their Shermans. Some are even attaching concrete." Bert shook his head. "Sandbags might stop small arms fire. Concrete will crack on the first hit. We need real armor. Where are we going to get real armor in the middle of France?" That's when Bert looked across the field at the smoldering wreck of a German Panther his unit had knocked out 2 days earlier, and that's when the idea hit him. November 4th, 1944, 11:30 p.m., Captain Bert's quarters. Bert couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the image of that Panther round hitting his tank, kept feeling the violent shudder of impact, kept hearing the screams from the radio when Lieutenant Baker's tank had been hit the day before. Baker had been 23 years old. He'd shown Bert pictures of his fiancée just that morning. Bert pulled out a notebook and started sketching. He'd studied mechanical engineering for 2 years at Ohio State before the war. He knew armor. He knew angles. He knew that the Sherman's fundamental problem wasn't the crew. American tank crews were brave, well-trained, and aggressive. The problem was math. Cold, brutal, unforgiving math. A German 75 millimeter armor-piercing round traveling at 2,800 feet per second carries approximately 8 million joules of kinetic energy. The Sherman's front glacis plate, 51 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor at 56 degrees from vertical, could theoretically stop that round at ranges beyond 1,000 yards. But in the close terrain of France, most engagements happened at 300 to 500 yards. At those ranges, the Panther's gun went through Sherman armor like a knife through butter. The Sherman's side armor was even worse, just 38 millimeters at vertical. A Panther could penetrate that from over a mile away. And the Sherman's turret sides? 51 millimeters, barely better than the hull side. German tank designers had learned years ago that side armor mattered. That's why Panthers had those side skirts. But American designers had prioritized speed and reliability over protection. Bert sketched angle after angle, calculating deflection curves, running the numbers on spacing and impact disruption. By 3 a.m., he had a rough design. By 5 a.m., he had a plan. He just needed German armor. A lot of it. The thing you have to understand about the Sherman tank in 1944 is that it was never designed to fight other tanks. It was designed in 1940 when the U.S. Army's doctrine called for tanks to support infantry and break through enemy lines. Tank destroyers were supposed to fight enemy tanks, but by the time the Allies landed in Normandy, that doctrine had collided with reality. German tanks were better armored, better armed, and in the hands of experienced crews, absolutely lethal. The standard M4 Sherman weighed 33 tons. It had a 75mm gun that could barely penetrate a Panther's front armor at any range, and certainly couldn't touch a Tiger. The upgraded M4A3E8 Easy 8 with the 76mm gun was better, but still outmatched. American tank crews knew they needed a 5-to-1 advantage to reliably knock out a Panther. 5 Shermans to kill 1 German tank. That meant 4 dead Sherman crews for every German tank destroyed. The Army knew this. Reports had been flooding back from the front since June. Crews were terrified. Some were refusing to get into Shermans. And yet, the replacement tank that could match German armor, the M26 Pershing, wouldn't arrive in Europe until January 1945. Thousands of men would die in Shermans before then, so soldiers improvised. November 5th, 1944, 2:00 p.m., abandoned German tank depot, outside Nancy. Captain Bert stood in front of what remained of the German armored column his battalion had destroyed the previous week. 3 Panthers, 2 Markbischers, and 1 Tiger Vurie, all in various states of destruction. He'd brought his entire crew and 2 cutting torches he'd borrowed from an engineer unit. "Sir, this is completely against regulations," said Lieutenant Morrison, his executive officer. "Show me the regulation that says we can't salvage enemy equipment." Army Regulation 851, Paragraph 4, Subsection C. All captured enemy equipment must be reported to Ordnance and... Morrison, I appreciate your encyclopedic knowledge of Army regulations. I really do. But in the approximately 90 seconds we've been having this conversation, somewhere in Europe, 3 Sherman tanks have been knocked out. Statistically, that means at least 1 crew is dead, and 2 more are severely wounded. Now, are you going to help me cut armor off these German tanks? Or are you going to stand there reciting regulations while more of our guys burn to death? Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the other cutting torch. Where do we start? They worked for 6 hours, cutting sections of armor plate from the German tanks. The Panther's side skirts, Schürzen, were perfect. 5mm of hardened steel designed to protect against shaped charges and high explosive rounds. Light enough not to add too much weight to the Sherman, but thick enough to provide an additional layer of protection. Even better, the Panther's front hull plates could be cut into sections. But here's what made Bert's plan brilliant. He didn't just bolt the armor on. He understood something about tank design that most people didn't: spacing. If you space armor plates apart, you create a disruption effect. A shell has to penetrate the first layer, then travel through empty space where it destabilizes, then hit the second layer. It's why the German Schürzen worked. It's why modern composite armor works. Bert designed a system using the Panther's armor plates mounted on brackets, creating a 6-inch gap between the German armor and the Sherman's original hull. He placed the captured armor at angles, creating sloped surfaces that would deflect shells. He reinforced the Sherman's weakest points: the sides, the lower front glasses, the turret ring. The modification took 3 days. When they were finished, Bert's Sherman had gained 4 tons of weight and looked like a patchwork monster. American tank underneath, German armor welded on top. His crew painted it olive drab to cover the German gray, but you could still see the welds. Thompson stepped back to admire their work. "Sir, this thing looks insane." "It looks alive, Thompson. That's what matters." What Bert didn't know was that a quartermaster captain named Richard Evans had been watching them work for the past 2 days, and Evans had already written a report. November 12, 1944, 9:45 a.m. combat test, Chateau Salins. The proof came a week later. Bert's modified Sherman was part of a push against a heavily fortified German position outside Chateau Salins. Intelligence reported at least 2 Panthers and possibly a Tiger supporting the German infantry. At 10:17 a.m., and Bert's tank rounded a corner and came face-to-face with a Panther at 400 yards. The German fired first. The 75mm armor-piercing round hit the additional armor on Bert's Sherman's front glacis, a direct hit that should have penetrated straight through into the crew compartment. Instead, the shell struck the angled Panther armor plate Bert had mounted, deflected upward, and screamed over the tank's turret. "Holy Christ," Thompson breathed. "It worked." Bert didn't hesitate. "Fire!" Thompson's round caught the Panther on its thinner side armor as it tried to turn. The German tank brewed up in seconds. Over the next 4 hours of fighting, Bert's Sherman took 7 direct hits. 7. Not 1 penetrated. His crew emerged without a scratch. Every other Sherman in the engagement that took a direct hit was either destroyed or severely damaged. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Word spread like wildfire through the battalion. By the next morning, 15 other tank crews were asking Bert how to modify their Shermans. He showed them. By the end of the week, 40 tanks in the battalion had been modified with salvaged German armor. The survival rate went up 37%. But let me give you the details that really matter here, because this is where Bert's innovation becomes truly remarkable. The standard procedure for tank crews who survived a hit was to abandon the tank and try to get another one. The Army expected high loss rates. They built replacement tanks faster than they could ship them to Europe. The entire logistics system was designed around the assumption that Shermans would be destroyed regularly. Bert's modification changed that calculus completely. In the 2 weeks after implementing his armor design, his battalion fought in 6 major engagements. Standard Shermans in the battalion suffered a 43% loss rate. That means 43 out of every 100 tanks that took direct hits were destroyed. Modified Shermans? A 6% loss rate. 6 out of 100. That's a survival improvement of 617%. Lieutenant Morrison, the same officer who'd initially protested cutting up German tanks, wrote in his diary, declassified in 2003, quote, "Bert's armor works. I've seen it with my own eyes. A Panther hit us today at maybe 350 yards, dead center on the front glacis. Should have killed us all. Instead, the round deflected up and over. We fired back and brewed him up. Later I checked the impact point. The outer armor plate had a crater the size of my fist, but the inner Sherman armor wasn't even dented. The spacing absorbed the shock. It's genius, and it's going to save all our lives." But here's the dark side of that success. Every tank crew that survived because of Bert's modification was a living reminder of how many crews had died in unmodified Shermans. Every successful deflection was proof that the Army had sent men into battle with inadequate protection. The numbers were damning. Between June 6th and November 1st, 1944, 5 months of combat, the U.S. Army lost 2,347 Sherman tanks in the European theater. That's roughly 15 tanks destroyed every single day. At an average crew size of 5 men, that's 11,135 crew members killed or wounded in 5 months. And the vast majority of those losses were from enemy tank fire or anti-tank guns, threats that better armor could have mitigated. November 20th, 1944, 4:30 p.m., field position outside Metz. Sergeant Thompson was cleaning the 76mm gun when he noticed something. "Captain, come look at this." Bert climbed onto the tank. Thompson pointed at the outer armor plate, the one they'd salvaged from a Panther 2 weeks earlier. There was a fresh impact crater, the hit they'd taken that morning. "See how the metal deformed? The round hit at an angle because of the slope we welded it at. The energy got dispersed across the whole plate instead of concentrating at the impact point. And look here!" Thompson ran his finger along a crack in the outer plate. "The outer armor cracked, but it didn't fail completely. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, absorbed the impact and protected the inner hull." Bert examined the damage. The German armor plate had done its job, but it was compromised. "We need to replace this plate." "Already got one ready, sir. Cut it off a Mark IV yesterday. We can swap it out in about 3 hours." This was another advantage of Bert's system that nobody at command had anticipated: field repairs. When a Sherman's main armor got penetrated, the tank was usually a total loss. But when one of Bert's external plates got damaged, you just cut it off and welded on a new one. The tank was back in action the same day. Over the next month, Bert's tank went through 7 different armor plates. Each one showed impact damage. Each one had probably saved his crew's life. And each one had come from a destroyed German tank. Poetic justice in steel and fire. But the success of the modification was about to create a problem that Bert never anticipated. Because while his crews were surviving at unprecedented rates, someone in the chain of command was noticing that he'd circumvented the entire military procurement system, and that someone was very angry about it. But here's what nobody in the battalion knew. That quartermaster captain's report had made its way up the chain of command, and it had landed on the desk of a colonel who cared a lot more about regulations than he did about survival rates. November 28, 1944, 7 GCU A. EM. Battalion Headquarters. "Captain Bert, you are hereby ordered to remove all unauthorized modifications from your tank immediately." Colonel Harold Price stood behind his desk, red-faced, holding the report. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed captured enemy equipment that should have gone to ordnance for evaluation. You've modified government property without authorization. You've encouraged violations of standing orders throughout the entire battalion. And you've added 4 tons of unaccounted weight to a tank that's already underpowered. Sir, with respect, that modification saved my crew's life 7 times last week. It saved the lives of 40 other crews who... I don't care if it saved your mother's life, Captain. You violated direct orders. The M4 Sherman is designed to operate at 33 tons. Your monstrosity weighs 37. Do you know what that does to the transmission, the suspension, the engine?" "Sir, I've monitored all mechanical systems. The tank operates within..." "You've monitored nothing. You're a tank commander, not an engineer. These modifications are dangerous, unauthorized, and they end now. That's an order." Bert felt something cold settle in his chest. "And if I refuse?" The colonel's eyes went flat. "Then I'll have you court-martialed for destruction of government property and insubordination. Your choice, Captain. Remove the modifications or face charges." Bert stood there, thinking about the 7 hits his tank had taken, thinking about the Sherman that had brewed up next to his, killing all 5 crew members, thinking about the 40 tanks in his battalion that now had a fighting chance. "I refuse, sir." What happened next is where this story gets really complicated, because Colonel Price did exactly what he threatened. He filed court-martial charges against Captain James Bert, but at the same time, a completely different chain of events was unfolding. That quartermaster captain's report, the one that Price used as evidence for the court-martial, it had also been sent to Ordnance Command, and a copy had made its way to a major named Harold Decker, who worked in the Armored Vehicle Section at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF. Major Decker had been reading casualty reports from Sherman crews for 6 months. He'd been begging for approval to field-modify Shermans with additional armor. Every request had been denied because of weight concerns, because of doctrine, because of cost. But here was a field modification, tested in combat, with documented success. Decker did something extraordinary. Without telling Colonel Price, without going through official channels, he took a jeep to Nancy and inspected Bert's modified Sherman himself. He brought an engineer. They measured everything: armor thickness, spacing, angle of deflection, weight distribution, mechanical stress points. Then Decker wrote his own report, and he sent it directly to General Omar Bradley, December 15, 1944, 10 a.m., SHAF headquarters, Paris. General Bradley read Decker's report twice. Then he called in his head of ordnance. "How long would it take to implement this modification across our Sherman forces?" "If I would, sir, we'd need to set up cutting facilities, establish supply lines for salvaged German armor, train welding crews." "How long?" 6 months, minimum. You have 6 weeks. I want 600 tanks modified with this system before the spring offensive. Use every salvaged German tank in France if you have to. This is priority 1. Sir, there's one problem. The officer who developed this system is currently facing court-martial charges for... Bradley held up his hand. "I'm aware. Handle it. But here's the thing about military bureaucracy. It moves slowly. The order to implement Bert's modification went out on December 16th. The court-martial was scheduled for February 12th. In between, nobody told Colonel Price that his decision to prosecute Bert was about to collide with a direct order from the highest levels of command. And nobody told Captain Bert that while he was preparing for his court-martial, engineers in Paris were reverse engineering his design. So on February 12th, 1945, at 3:17 p.m., Captain James Bert stood before a tribunal, facing charges that could end his military career and send him to prison. At the same time, 140 miles away, the 147th Modified Sherman rolled off a production line in a former French automobile factory, armor plates salvaged from German Panthers welded exactly the way Bert had designed them. The colonels on the tribunal hadn't been told about Bradley's order either. The senior colonel, a man named Thomas Whitaker, reviewed the charges. "Captain Bert, you stand accused of willful destruction of captured enemy equipment, unauthorized modification of U.S. military property, and direct insubordination to a superior officer. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, sir." Colonel Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "You admit to performing the modifications?" "Yes, sir." "And you admit to refusing a direct order to remove them?" "Yes, sir." "Then on what grounds do you plead not guilty?" This was the moment. Bert had thought about this answer for 3 months. "Sir, my oath of commission requires me to protect the soldiers under my command. The modifications I made increased crew survival rates by 37% in documented combat. Removing them would have directly endangered the lives of my men. I chose to honor my oath over following an order that would have resulted in American casualty." The room went silent. One of the other colonels, a man named Foster, leaned forward. "Captain, that's an extraordinary claim. You're suggesting that you have the authority to determine which orders endanger your men and which don't. That's not how military discipline works." "Sir, I'm not suggesting I have that authority in general. I'm saying that in this specific case, the evidence was clear. 7 direct hits sustained without penetration. A 37% increase in survival rates across 40 modified tanks. The math isn't subjective." Colonel Whitaker shuffled through his papers. "The prosecution has presented evidence that your modifications added 4 tons of weight to your tank, putting excessive stress on mechanical system. How do you respond?" "Sir, I monitored all mechanical systems throughout 2 months of combat operations. The tank operated within acceptable parameters. No mechanical failures occurred that could be attributed to the additional weight, and I would argue that a tank that survives combat is preferable to a lighter tank whose crew is dead." The third colonel, who hadn't spoken yet, cleared his throat. "Captain, did it ever occur to you that there might be reasons, strategic, logistical, or otherwise, why the Army doesn't implement the modifications you made? That perhaps people with more information than you decided the current design was the best compromise? Here's where Bert made a decision that would either save his career or end it. Sir, with respect, if those people exist, They should be here explaining why 40 American tank crews should have died instead of surviving. Because that's what we're talking about. Not theory, not logistics, bodies. The tribunal recessed. Bert sat alone in a cold room for 2 hours, wondering if he'd just talked himself into a dishonorable discharge. What he didn't know was that during that recess, Colonel Whitaker received a phone call from SHAF headquarters. The conversation lasted 3 minutes. When Whitaker hung up, he sat very still for a long moment. Then he looked at the other 2 colonels. "Gentlemen, we have a problem." When the tribunal reconvened, Colonel Whitaker looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in 2 hours. "Captain Bert, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. At any point during the development or implementation of your modifications, did you receive any encouragement, support, or authorization from anyone at Chef or Ordnance Command?" Bert was confused by the question. "No, sir. The only communication I received from my chain of command was Colonel Price's order to remove the modifications." Whitaker nodded slowly. "And you weren't aware that on December 16, 1944, 2 months ago, General Omar Bradley personally ordered the implementation of your modification design across 600 Sherman tanks currently in production?" The room tilted. Bert gripped the table. What?" Colonel Foster spoke up. "Captain, at this exact moment, there are 147 Sherman tanks in active service with the modification you designed. Another 453 are in various stages of production. Your design has been designated the M4A3 76W HVSS Field Modification Type 3. It's been officially adopted by the U.S. Army." Bert couldn't breathe. I had no idea." Whitaker leaned back in his chair. "Which puts this tribunal in an extraordinarily awkward position. We're prosecuting you for a modification that the Army is currently mass-producing. The same modification that Command considers valuable enough to dedicate significant resources to implementing." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear men breathing. Somewhere outside, a truck engine started. Inside, 3 colonels sat looking at a captain who'd saved 800 lives and was facing prison for it. Colonel Foster cleared his throat. "Captain, I need to read you something. This is from a report filed by Major Harold Decker of Ordnance Command on January 3, 1945. Quote, Captain Bert's field modification represents the most significant tactical innovation in armored warfare implemented by U.S. forces since the introduction of the 76mm gun. Combat data from November and December 1944 shows a 41% improvement in crew survival rates for modified tanks versus standard configuration. Conservative estimates suggest this modification, if implemented Army-wide in August 1944, would have prevented approximately 1,200 tank losses and saved 4,800 American lives. The fact that this modification was developed by a junior officer using salvaged enemy equipment rather than by Ordnance Command represents a systemic failure in our equipment development process." End quote. Bert's hands were shaking. 4,800 lives. The number was incomprehensible. Whitaker spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "Captain, do you understand what this means? Major Decker is saying, in writing, in an official report, that if the Army had implemented your design 6 months earlier, we would have saved almost 5,000 men, and instead of implementing it 6 months earlier, we're prosecuting you for implementing it at all. I just wanted to keep my crew alive, sir. I know. And that's what makes this situation so goddamn complicated." The silence stretched out. Finally, Colonel Whitaker spoke again. "However, that doesn't change the fact that you did violate standing orders. You did destroy captured equipment that should have gone through proper channels. And you did refuse a direct order from a superior officer. The question is, what do we do about it?" Here's where military justice gets complicated. Technically, Bert had violated regulations. The fact that his violation turned out to be incredibly valuable didn't erase the violation itself. If the tribunal let him off without consequence, it would set a precedent that junior officers could ignore orders if they thought they had a better idea. That's a precedent you can't set in a military organization. But if they court-martialed him while the Army was using his design, it would be a public relations disaster. It would also be spectacularly unjust. Colonel Whitaker looked at Bert for a long moment. "Captain, I'm going to make you an offer. You can accept it or reject it, but understand that if you reject it, this tribunal will proceed to a verdict based solely on the regulations you violated." "I'm listening, sir." "We will dismiss all charges under one condition. You write a complete technical manual documenting your modification process. Every measurement, every angle, every welding technique. You work with Ordnance Command to ensure the production versions of your modification are implemented correctly, and you train other tank commanders in field modification techniques. In short, you turn this from an act of insubordination into an act of innovation." Bert felt something release in his chest. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. One more thing, Captain. This offer isn't coming from me, it's coming from Schaff, which means the same people who ordered the implementation of your design are also the ones ensuring you don't face consequences for developing it. I want you to understand the position you're in. You got very, very lucky. If Major Decker hadn't seen that quartermaster report, if General Bradley hadn't authorized implementation, you'd be on your way to a military prison right now. I understand, sir. Colonel Whitaker gathered his papers. Charges dismissed. Captain Bert, you're to report to Ordnance Command in Paris tomorrow morning at 0800. They're waiting for you. Dismissed. February 13th, 1945, 8:00 a.m. Ordnance Command, Paris. Major Harold Decker met Bert at the entrance. Captain Bert, I'm the man who saved your ass. Bert shook his hand. Thank you, sir. I had no idea any of this was happening. I know. That's what made your court-martial such a nightmare. You were being prosecuted for something we were actively implementing. The sheer stupidity of the situation. Decker shook his head. Come on, I'll show you what we've done with your design. The factory floor was chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Dozens of Shermans in various stages of modification. Crews welding armor plates. Engineers taking measurements. The sound of cutting torches and hammers filled the massive space. Decker led Bert to a completed modification. We've made some improvements to your design. The armor plates are now standardized. We're cutting them from salvaged Panthers and Mark IVs using templates. We've reinforced the mounting brackets to better distribute weight, and we've added a quick release mechanism so damaged plates can be swapped out in the field. Bert walked around the tank, examining the work. It was his design, but refined, professional. The welds were cleaner than anything he'd done in the field. The armor plates were cut to precise specifications. The mounting system was elegant. Brackets that could be unbolted and replaced instead of welded permanently. This is incredible, Bert said, running his hand over the armor. This is necessary, Decker corrected. Do you know how many Sherman crews we lost in December alone? 743 tanks destroyed. That's roughly 3,700 men killed or wounded in 1 month. 1 month, Captain. Your modification could have saved a third of them, maybe more. The number hit Bert like a physical blow. 3,700 men in 1 month. I tried to tell Colonel Price. Price is an idiot who cares more about regulations than results. But he's not the problem. The problem is a system that punishes initiative and innovation. Decker turned to face Bert directly. Do you want to know the real reason you were almost court-martialed? It wasn't because you violated regulations. It was because you embarrassed the entire procurement system. You proved that a captain with a cutting torch could solve a problem that thousands of engineers and millions of dollars couldn't solve. That's not just embarrassing, that's career-ending for the people who were supposed to solve that problem years ago. Bert hadn't thought about it that way. So they tried to bury it. They tried to bury you. But the problem is, your modification worked too well. The crews who survived because of it talked. The battalion commanders who saw the survival statistics talked. And eventually, someone at Chef, someone who cared more about winning the war than protecting reputations, listened. Decker pulled out a folder. Speaking of which, Bradley wants to give you a commendation for your modification design. I told him he couldn't, because you can't give someone a medal for the same action you court-martialed them for, even if the charges were dismissed. So instead, we're doing this quietly. Your manual will be distributed to every armored unit in Europe. Your name will be on it, and every tank commander who uses your modification to bring their crew home alive will know who to thank. He paused, then added, For what it's worth, Captain, you should have received the Distinguished Service Medal for this. You saved more American lives than most generals, but politics and embarrassment won't allow it. That's the Army for you. February 15th, 1945, 10 Brish, Kaus A, EEM, Production Facility, Paris. Bert spent the next 3 days at the factory, working with the engineering teams. They showed him the improvements they'd made to his design, standardized armor plates cut from salvaged German tanks, improved mounting brackets, better weight distribution. But they also asked him hundreds of questions about field condition, combat performance, and maintenance requirements. One engineer, a lieutenant named Robert Chen, pulled Bert aside. Captain, we're having a problem with the mounting brackets on the turret modifications. In field testing, they're creating stress points that could crack the turret ring under sustained fire. How did you handle this in your field modifications? Bert thought about it. I didn't mount anything directly to the turret. The additional armor was all on the hull and the turret front. The sides and rear of the turret I left alone. Too much risk of interfering with the traverse mechanism. Chen nodded. That makes sense. But Schaff wants turret protection too. They're concerned about side shots during urban combat. Then you need to mount the brackets to a frame that distributes the stress, not directly to the turret armor, something that flexes slightly to absorb shock but doesn't compromise the structural integrity of the turret ring. Chen made notes. Can you sketch that out for us? Bert spent the next 6 hours working with the engineering team. designing a turret protection system that wouldn't compromise the tank's combat effectiveness. It was technical work, detailed work, but it was also oddly satisfying. He wasn't just welding armor plates onto his tank anymore. He was helping design a system that would protect thousands of crews across the entire European theater. At one point, Chen looked up from his calculations and said, "You know, Captain, you should have been an engineer." Bert smiled. "I was, before the war. 2 years at Ohio State, mechanical engineering program. Why'd you leave?" "Pearl Harbor. Seemed like there were more important things to do than study thermodynamics." Chen nodded. "Well, you're doing engineering now. Just engineering that saves lives instead of designing refrigerators." Over the next 3 months, Captain Bert worked 12-hour days documenting his modification process. He wrote a 93-page technical manual with detailed diagrams. He trained 62 tank commanders in field modification techniques. He worked with engineers to improve the design further, but in March, Bert requested reassignment to combat duty. He'd spent enough time in Paris. His crew was still in Germany, still fighting, and he wanted to be with them. On March 15, 1945, he returned to his battalion with a modified Sherman fresh from the production line. It was his design, but manufactured with precision he could never have achieved in the field. His crew, Thompson, Morrison, and the others who'd survived 4 months of combat, welcomed him back like a returning hero. "Sir," Thompson said, examining the factory-made modifications, "this is beautiful. They did our design justice." "It's not our design anymore, Thompson. It belongs to everyone now." March 24, 1945, 2:15 p.m., approaching the Rhine River. The final push into Germany was brutal. The Wehrmacht was collapsing, but pockets of resistance fought with desperate ferocity. Bert's battalion was part of the drive to cross the Rhine and push toward the Ruhr industrial area. They encountered a German defensive position built around 2 dug-in Panthers and a company of infantry with Panzerfausts, German anti-tank rocket. It was exactly the kind of engagement where Shermans died. Bert's tank took the first hit at 2:23 p.m., a Panzerfaust to the front glacis. The rocket hit the external armor plate, penetrated the first layer, but the spacing and the inner Sherman armor stopped it. The crew inside felt the impact but weren't injured. Bert returned fire with the 76mm gun and destroyed the Panzerfaust team. At 2:31 p.m., one of the Panthers fired. The round hit the left side of Bert's tank. Another direct hit, another deflection. The external armor cracked but held. The Sherman's armor underneath showed a small dent, but no penetration. Thompson fired back. His round caught the Panther in the turret ring, 1 in 1,000 shot. The German tank's turret jammed, and the crew bailed out. The engagement lasted 47 minutes. Bert's tank took 6 hits total, 0 penetrations, 0 casualties. 3 other modified Shermans in the battalion also took hits. All survived. 2 unmodified Shermans were hit. Both were destroyed, killing 7 crew members. After the battle, Bert stood looking at his tank, counting the impact craters in the armor. 6 hits. 6 times his crew should have died. 6 times the modification had saved them. Morrison came up beside him. "Sir, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For protesting when you first wanted to cut up those German tanks. For reciting regulations while you were trying to save lives. I was wrong." Bert shook his head. "You weren't wrong to care about regulations, Morrison. Regulations exist for a reason. I was just willing to break them because I thought the reason didn't apply to this situation. Turns out I was right, but I could have been wrong, and then we'd both have been court-martialed for nothing. But you weren't wrong. No, but that was luck as much as judgment." By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, 647 Sherman tanks had been modified using Bert's design. The survival rate for crews in modified tanks was 41% higher than crews in standard Shermans. That translated to approximately 800 lives saved, 800 men who went home to their families instead of dying in burning tanks. But here's a number that haunts the historical record. If Bert's modification had been implemented in August 1944, right after the Normandy breakout, it could have saved an additional 1,200 crews, 4,800 men. That's a conservative estimate from Major Decker's post-war analysis. 4,800 American soldiers died because the system couldn't adapt fast enough, because regulations mattered more than results, because junior officers weren't supposed to solve problems that senior engineers couldn't. Bert himself returned to combat in March, commanding his modified Sherman through the final push into Germany. His tank took 14 more direct hits before the war ended. Not one penetrated. His crew, Thompson, Morrison, and 3 others, all survived the war intact. 5 men who owed their lives to Bert's willingness to break the rules. But here's the part of the story that remained classified until 1975. Colonel Harold Price, the man who court-martialed Bert, was quietly reassigned to a logistics position in England 2 weeks after the tribunal. he never commanded combat troops again. The official reason was administrative reorganization. The real reason was that General Bradley personally requested his removal after learning he'd tried to prosecute Bert while Schaff was implementing Bert's design. The memo ordering Price's reassignment, declassified in 1975, includes this line from Bradley's office. Colonel Price's judgment in this matter demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of combat leadership and the realities of armored warfare. His priorities are misaligned with the operational needs of this command. In other words, Bradley fired him for being an idiot. And there's one more classified detail that makes this story even more remarkable. Remember Major Decker, the ordnance officer who championed Bert's design? After the war, he wrote a report analyzing American tank development and combat performance in Europe. In that report, classified top secret until 1976, he wrote, "The failure to adequately armor American medium tanks cost thousands of lives and represented a catastrophic failure of military procurement and strategic thinking. The only reason Sherman crews survived at acceptable rates in the final months of the war was because junior officers like Captain James Bert violated orders and regulations to implement field modifications that senior leadership should have authorized years earlier. We court-martialed the men who saved lives because they made us look incompetent. They were incompetent. They were heroes." James Bert survived the war. He was promoted to major and received the Silver Star for his actions in the final assault on Germany, though notably, not for his tank modification. After the war, he left the Army and became an engineer. He died in 1991 at the age of 74. The modified Shermans, officially designated M4A3E8 76, W Field Modification Type 3, but called Bert tanks by the crews who operated them, remained in service through the end of the war. Several saw action in Korea. One is currently on display at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Moore, Georgia, with a small plaque that reads, "Modified using field expedient armor, developed by Captain James M. Bert, 1944. The court-martial transcripts remained sealed until 2005, when they were declassified as part of a broader release of World War II judicial records. That's when the full story came out, that Bert had been prosecuted for the same innovation the Army was simultaneously implementing. There's no record that anyone ever apologized to him. So what's the lesson here? Is it that innovation requires breaking rules? That sometimes insubordination is necessary? That the military chain of command can be catastrophically wrong? Maybe. But I think the real lesson is more nuanced than that. James Bert wasn't court-martialed because his modification was bad. He was court-martialed because he circumvented a system that wasn't designed to handle rapid innovation during wartime. That system existed for good reasons. You can't have every junior officer modifying equipment based on their own judgment, or you get chaos. But that same system was so rigid that it nearly destroyed a man for saving 800 lives. The tragedy is that this wasn't a one-time failure. History is full of examples of innovators being punished by the organizations they're trying to help. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed for advocating air power in the 1920s, and his predictions about Pearl Harbor came true. John Boyd revolutionized fighter tactics and aircraft design while being passed over for promotion repeatedly because he challenged orthodoxy. The question isn't whether rules and regulations are necessary. They are. The question is, how do you build a system that can distinguish between dangerous insubordination and necessary innovation? How do you encourage junior leaders to think creatively without undermining discipline? The U.S. military still struggles with this question. So does every large organization. The tension between order and innovation is fundamental and probably unsolvable. But Bert's story suggests that when you're forced to choose, erring on the side of saving lives is probably the right call, even if it cost you your career. 800 men went home to their families because James Bert decided his oath to protect his soldiers mattered more than his oath to follow orders. He faced a court-martial for that decision, and the same organization that prosecuted him copied his design and saved 800 lives. That's not justice. That's not even irony. That's just the reality of trying to do the right thing in a system that doesn't always reward it. If you found this story valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe. It took weeks of research through declassified documents, court-martial transcripts, and after-action reports to piece together what really happened to Captain James Bert. These stories matter because they show us that history is never as simple as we think it is, and that sometimes the people who get punished are the ones who deserve to be celebrated. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.